So in this video, we're talking about how to help you get your hot tub all connected up and working so that you can enjoy the warm water, especially on a day like this, a little bit cloudy and dreary. So let's get started. Okay, so we're going to talk all about how to connect these hot tubs up. Now, first off, this is my place, my hot tub. I'm going to show you how this one was done. We're going to work a little bit backwards. I'm going to show you what the connections look like inside the spa pack. Then we're going to go on location and do a job from start to finish. Now, the job we're doing there is a little bit different of a scenario than this one. Here, when we did our home renovation, we no longer needed the feed for the electric range and oven. So that was a 40 amp 240 volt outlet, 125 240 volt. So we didn't need it anymore, so we took it out because we put in a gas range, and I used that to feed the hot tub. So I just poked the wire back out through the wall into a spa pack. So what that does for me, a spa pack is basically just a small 4-circuit weatherproof panel that comes with a 40 amp 2-pole GFI breaker in it, or 60 or whatever you happen to need. This one's a 40. And so what that spa pack does, it provides you with both things you need. You need to have a line of sight disconnect for your hot tub. Has to be outside of like a 5 or 6 foot range so you can't reach it from the hot tub. But it also needs to be in line of sight. Now the reason for that is if someone's working on this, they want to be able to shut off the breaker or pull out the service disconnect, as will be the case in the other one, and be able to work on the tub knowing that nobody's going to turn it on because they can see them, and if they go turn it on, that's a bad thing, right? So in this case, gives us both that protection. In the one we're going to do in the project video here, what I had is a big empty 40 circuit sub panel that only had 3 circuits in it in the basement, so it was a crawl space, easy access to get, or semi-easy access to get to the outside to where we needed to put the service disconnect. So I wanted to utilize that panel, saved a little money on a weatherproof panel because you know, anywhere from $250 to $300 is a spa pack, and that has the breaker included with the panel. So this case, I only paid about $200 for the breaker to go on the existing panel, and then we needed a little 20 amp service disconnect, or sorry, 60 amp service disconnect outside within line of sight of the tub, but out of reach again. So that's that case. Let me show you here where my panel is, where my spa pack is in relation to the tub. And then we're going to go into how I connect this tub up, and another little special feature I did here too. So working backwards, because over there at the other project, the tub's not on site yet. So what I've done is just got it all ready. So when the tub does come, all they have to do is plug in the Liquid-tite Flex and hook the connector up and hook up the 4 wires. So I'll show you that, but just let me show you where our panel is. Alright, so this is the spa pack, the outdoor weatherproof panel coming right outside the wall by the kitchen on our patio. Now, I'm just going to swing the camera around and you'll see right behind me, hang on everybody, is the hot tub. So, like I said, that gives us our 2 functions, GFCI protection. It's fed from a 40 amp 2-pole breaker in the main panel, but this gives us our GFI protection and the safety service disconnect. So let's look inside and see how that panel is connected so that we can show you how the spa pack is connected, and then we're going to go and do the whole wiring project at the other location. Alright, so just before I open up the panel here and show you the connections to the spa pack, I just wanted to point out one thing. When we put in this hot tub and we have it awning here, covered deck, we generally like our hot tub outside, but it's sure nice to have it inside when it's pouring rain. So one thing I did with this one I thought was kind of clever. I built a deck for it, and then I put 8 heavy-duty casters, not swivel casters, just straight back and forth casters. So 8 300-pound casters, so I got about 2,400 weight distribution total there. And if it's nice out, simply roll the tub out from under cover. And again, when it's raining, just push her back in. So to achieve that mobility that the tub has, what I did is I ran my conduit from that panel I showed you underground, underneath the concrete here, and I stubbed it up into this little junction box. This isn't a service disconnect, just strictly a JB. And then out of that, I came out the back of it with Liquid-tite Flex, and I made a nice long whip underneath there that kind of goes back and forth with the tub. And that's similar to what I'm going to do at the project we're going to go do from start to finish as well, because they're not quite sure where their tub is going to be. So I'm going to leave that plenty long so it can go to anywhere they might want the tub, and I may even talk them into a system like this where the tub can roll from undercover to a future deck they plan on putting on. However, so with the Liquid-tite Flex coming out of here into the spa pack, that's how we can get that mobility to move the tub back and forth. I put the junction box at about the halfway point, I should say, when it's going in or out. So about 6-foot loop in there gave me all the mobility I needed. So there's that loop of flex I'm talking about. Nice big loop in here, and then it comes into the back of that little junction box. So like I mentioned with the other tub, we're not going to be able to hook it up because it's not there yet, but I'm going to show you how the connections look. So we're kind of, like I say, working backwards, but I'm going to be leaving them 3/4 Liquid-tite Flex like this with the connector on it, and all they're going to have to do, probably the hot tub people when they bring it, they'll put that in and hook it up for them and turn the power on. So simple. You got to start with your ground. Your ground wire comes in here. You can see it looping around and coming into that bus, which has got the external ground going over to the motor frame as well. Then we have the neutral connection and a hot and a hot. So we got a black and a red hot. Try to give you as good of an angle as we can here, but very simple. There's your 3 terminals for neutral, hot, and hot, and your ground. Okay, so here we are now on location. The spa or the hot tub, whatever you want to call it, is going to be right where the camera is sitting. So out in the front corner of this pad, which is quite deep. So anywhere from the edge of that tub is going to be 5 feet or 1.5 meters away from, or 2 meters from, this safety disconnect. So we're going to work backwards here a little bit. The plan is to put this service disconnect right here, and the reason I chose this location is because we need to get in behind the fireplace cavity. We've got a gas fireplace in the corner here in the living room, and so I can get at the wall without making a mess, and then through the floor into the crawl space, because here the concrete goes right up to underneath the floor, the subfloor sheeting. So without a jackhammer, or a hammer drill I should say, it's going to be tough to get the conduit down into the crawl space through that concrete. So we'll go through the wall and then down through the floor. So the service disconnect I'm going to mount about right here. Now, as we mentioned, because we have nice access to a panel down there, lots of room for our GFI protection, our 40 amp 2-pole GFCI breaker there, then the other alternative would be feeding a 40 amp 2-pole regular breaker to here and use a spa pack here with your GFI protection. That would also give you the functionality of providing your service disconnect, because you have to have a service disconnect near the tub within line of sight, but no closer to the hot tub than 5 feet or 2 meters, depending on which code you're looking at. So this will provide that. All this is a service disconnect, just like you'd have for an HVAC unit, little pull-out disconnect, and that's just a safety thing. So when somebody's working on the tub and they shut the breaker off from the source, then they could be working on it and somebody may come along and, why is this breaker off, and turn it on. So this gives you line of sight, nobody can mess with it, and if you really want to be safe, you could pull that disconnect out and lock the box. But this will do the job for us. We're going to come down with a short piece of conduit now, and then an LB fitting like this that's going to go in behind the fireplace, down through the floor, through the crawl space to the panel. So I've done all my measurements and landmarking, and to make sure that when I drill this hole from here in, I'm going to be behind the fireplace. So that's next step, is to drill that hole, put the LB in place, measure our chunk of pipe that's going to be between here and the box, put everything together, and then from here we're going to use a 3/4 inch Liquid-tite whip or a Liquid-tite Flex, and we're going to make it plenty long to go around the pad and then go absolutely anywhere that that control box may end up in this spa that they're putting here. We're not sure which way they're going to want to orient it, if they're going to want to be focused on the backyard or focused on the mountain we have over here to the east. or to the west I should say, or sitting in the tub looking at the rest of the patio. So they haven't decided that yet, so we'll just make it plenty long so that it's gonna go in anywhere. If there's excess, coil it up inside the tub skirting and hook it up. But it's better to be looking at it than looking for it. So always make sure you leave enough, never too little, because then you got a problem. So let's get started. That box will fit nicely right here. It's beside the water hose, but that's not an issue. And it's beside the vent for the gas fireplace. But these get warm but not hot, and it won't be any heat to the side. You wouldn't want it up above it, because then you're in direct line of the heat coming out of that vent, chimney vent. So right there's good. Let's go. And just a quick shot here of where the tub's going to go, right out to that front corner of this patio area. They're going to cover this deck with a nice aluminum awning with a glass top. And that's where our disconnect I was showing you is going to go. So we've got the clearance we need between the edge of the tub and the service disconnect so that you can't reach it while you're in the tub. Give yourself a shock, although that's what GFI protection is for. Nonetheless, code rules. So we've got 3/4 inch PVC conduit, which is a 1 inch outside diameter. So I'm going to use a butterfly bit here and hopefully get through. We're going to have hardy board, sheeting, and then into the joist space, or the stud space behind here, which is going to be behind the fireplace. That's the plan. There's some aluminum flashing behind here that I didn't count on, so I'm going to get a hole saw and saw that out. Alright, so I put a metal hole saw on here and just sawed through that metal, just so as not to wreck my butterfly bit, although they're not that expensive. Now we'll carry on through the sheeting, through the wall sheeting. Murphy's Law says I'll probably hit a stud here instead of just sheeting. And I'm through. And as I suspected, just right on the edge of a stud, but we're good. We're through. Now I gotta go inside and make sure I can find that hole in behind the fireplace so we get communication between the wall so we can go down through the floor, or actually up from the crawl space to this spot. Lots of room there for the cabling I need. Make sure the hole's big enough for my conduit. Perfect. Okay. Inside we go and see if we can't find that we're come out the right spot behind the fireplace. Alright, so one more layer that I wasn't thinking of. I had to get through the drywall on the inside. So I had to use my big, nice auger bit here to get through. 6-inch walls here with insulation, so we got through it all. I'm to the back of the fireplace in the cavity in there. I've only got about a 3-inch by 2-inch hole to work with, so I've got to try to get this fish tape in there and find it behind the fireplace. Okay, so I'm in the cavity behind the fireplace. I can hear it actually hitting the vent, or it's just resonating through the vent here. So metal on metal in here. And I'm just going to stuff a whole bunch fish tape in there, and hopefully I'll see it, be able to dig it out. Alright, so there's my hole. I've got a cable run through, and I'll show you where it's coming out from behind the fireplace. So I'll be able to attach my cable to this, just piece of steel cable. It was soft enough and flexible enough to drop in through the wall, and then I was able to fish it out behind the fireplace, which I'll show you inside. Alright, so here's the cable from behind the fireplace coming out through that hole and by the gas line. So now what I got to do is go into the crawl space, and I've done all my measurements, so I'm landmarking off of a heat duct, heat register here in the floor. So I just have to go below, measure from it over 62 inches, and then about 4 inches or 2 inches less from center away from the wall than the heat register is. And that should mean my hole will come up through the floor there. I'll be able to fish the cable up through the crawl space in behind here and then hook it to this cable and pull it out the wall outside. And here's just a shot of that cable coming out from underneath the fireplace. Down below I go. All right, so as you can see, my steel cable coming through the wall from the outside, out that hole underneath the fireplace. And then I've got my cable coming up through the floor behind the fireplace. So now I got to pull this to the outside. So here's what I've done, just to make sure we don't lose this as we're pulling it through. I've taken off the outer jacket of the cable, and then I've tied the steel cable around the ground wire, and now I'm going to tape this all up with electrical tape so it's nice and smooth, and that should pull right out through. I'm going to have a helper feeding on one end and me pulling outside. Okay, so I've glued a little chunk onto my LB here that's going to go into the wall here. And then we measure the distance from the top of the LB up to the fitting to go into the service disconnect here. So there's our LB in place. Measure this distance. I want to have this service disconnect mounted so it's hitting the high spots of the hardy board here so that it sits level. So see in my shot, we're just looking at the top of it. I'm going to be able to catch one screw in the top there, and then it's resting on the next high spot of the hardy board, so that should make it vertically level. All right, so then measuring between here. So just checking that measurement, it was 14.5 inches. So I cut my pipe, and now I've slid it over top of the conduit and glued it in place. And I left this connector a little bit loose so that when I glue the pipe and shove that connector down onto the pipe, I can take my pump pliers and give it a little turn, and you just turn it until it gets stiff and quits wanting to move. Then you know that your glue is set, your cement. So I want to level this, and then I level the box, and more importantly, I want to line it up with that vent for the fireplace, because you know, if my box is level and this may be a bit crooked, it's going to show. So you want to just make sure your space between here is even. And I leveled that conduit earlier, so I kind of marked where this needs to go. So now we just screw it into place. Hardy board is tough stuff, so it's tough to get that screw to start, but once you're through it, it's solid. It can hang from that thing. And we'll put a conduit strap right here, and that part's done. But we'll wait till we get the whip on here, the Liquid-tite Flex that's going to come around and be ready to go into the hot tub. We'll wait to strap all that down at that time. All right, so I'm underneath the fireplace in the crawl space, and there's that hole I drilled up that came out behind the fireplace, and then of course through the wall and out into that LB and up to the service disconnect. So here you can see the cable going up through that hole, and there's the copper gas line as well. And then the cable will go through this joist space all the way over to where the workshop area is, where it's a higher ceiling crawl space, 6-foot ceiling, where it's kind of a workshop, and that's where the panel is. So the cable goes along this joist space, and then it'll be drilled through the joists over to the panel. Okay, so here we are in the crawl space. That's a little higher clearance, 6 feet in here, and it's about 3 feet back there. So where that fireplace is and where I crawled out of is right there. And now as you see, the joist spaces run this way. So that's where its cables now run and tucked away and nailed up or stapled up into place all the way through there to where we went out to the safety disconnect. And now it comes out here behind those boxes. I've got some boxes all laid out here to catch the sawdust and the chips that fall when I drill with my auger bit. So there's the panel that we're heading to. I've cut the cable to the right length I need. So now I need to drill the holes. So first thing you want to do when you're going to drill these holes is make sure you got nothing behind, like a wire that you're going to drill into. So you check both sides of every joist and all seems well. And I'm going to stay, here's a cable here I'm going to have to be aware of, going over to that junction box. So you want to just check before you drill every hole. Here's another 3-wire here. So you want to check before you start drilling. Now what you want to do when you're drilling through joists is you want to go every second one in one direction and then come back and do the other. And the reason for that is that when you're pulling the cables through the joist, if they're all going the same direction, the holes, because you have to go on a bit of an angle. So if they're all going the same way, you get nothing but friction. But if you have one going this way, one going that way, makes for a smooth pull. So let's drill these holes. Now I'm going to start at the far end, and I have to go this direction because there's no other way to go. And I'm just going to get it right by the overlap. Again, checking behind, make sure there's nothing in the way. And as soon as you break through, stop, because you don't want that auger bit to grab and maybe drill itself into a heat duct or something else. Okay, so there's one hole, miss one. Again, check behind, no wires. Go about at least a third of the way up the truss. Higher you can go, the better, because you don't want to mess with the integrity of the truss. And of course, they're stronger in the center. If you drill in the center, if you drill down towards the bottom, you're going to weaken that truss. Again, miss one. One more in this direction. Check for a wire. And then we go back, turn the drill around, catch the ones going that way. And I've worked my way back. I got one more to go, the one right above the panel. Check for a wire. Lo and behold, there is one in the way. So we'll stay high above it. And now I can pull my cable through the joists. Now see, I'm pulling through now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 joists. If I get on the downhill run here, I should be able to pull that slack up through 6 joists. Now if your holes were all going the same direction, you wouldn't get 2. And here we are at the panel. Cable's in. We're going to tie that into the top of that panel. And this is where we'll put our 40 amp 2-pole GFCI breaker to feed over to that service disconnect and then onto the tub. So we'll open this panel up, take our knockout out, and proceed to tie in this panel. Okay, so this segment I'm going to show you how I'm going to pull in the wires inside this 3/4 inch Liquid-tite Flex. Now, as I said, we're not sure exactly where that hot tub is going to be situated on the pad or which way it's going to be orientated. So we're not sure where the spa pack is going to end up that we need to get the connections to. So we may be just right on this length of 25 feet and we may be 10 feet too long. So it's better to have too much. So I'm going to strip a length of this NMD 9083 cable and slide it inside that 3/4 inch Flex. Now, I'm not sure how this is going to work, so I'll just show you as we go, and I will explain anything that went wrong, and without filming it, you won't have to put up with a few of the curse words that may spew out of my mouth. So anyway, first off, we're going to just strip the jacket off this for the entire length. I've cut the NMD to the right length, and then I'm going to work on ways to slide it over that 3/4 inch Liquid-tite Flex. And I'm working alone here, so it may be difficult, but stay with me. We'll start by stripping it. When I strip NMD cable of this size, I like to just score it. So it takes a nice touch, but you just want to score that cable without going into the conductors. Using a utility knife. Would be good to have gloves here that you can't cut, but I'm just being awful careful. So as you see, I just scored it, and you can peel it back, tear it the rest of the way. So I'll continue stripping this the whole length, and then we'll work on ways to get it slid into that Liquid-tite Flex. First, I'm going to try to push it through. I doubt that's going to work. I've got it strapped up here so it's straight. If that doesn't work, I'm going to suck in a piece of nylon cord with a shop vac, and then we'll attach the wire to the shop vac. I may need to have somebody helping me, someone pulling and me feeding it in. So I'll finish stripping it and we'll see how she goes. So that's as far as I got with just scoring the NMD jacket. Now, if you watch carefully here, you see I'm keeping my hand well back of the blade, so you don't want to cut yourself with one of these utility knives. So continue scoring it like that, and as you can see, the jacket just rips off from where you've scored it already. Okay, I'd say the first attempt was pretty successful. I thought I'd just try pushing it in and see how far I got. And I actually got it into within about 10 feet of getting it pushed all the way in. So pulling wire through conduit or flex is all about reducing friction. So what I think is, well, wire lube is a good thing, but if you don't have any handy, dishwashing detergent works great. So what I'm going to do is dump a little bit down there to reduce friction. I've pulled it, stretched it nice and tight with no bends. That's why you only have a maximum allowable amount of bends in a piece of conduit of 490s. So any more than that and it's impossible to overcome that friction, or very difficult anyway. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take another attempt at it by dumping a little dish soap in here, stretching that conduit, flexible conduit out as straight as I can, and we'll see if that works. Well, I can tell you that worked amazingly well, better than any of my expectations. I'm almost through. It's going in very easily. So between straightening it out and the dish soap, add a little lubrication and things go much better. Now, if you've ever watched the TV series The Office, there's probably a joke in there somewhere you might be familiar with. Anyhow, I've got it in. That worked great. And now I can prepare these ends ready to tie into the service disconnect, and then have it all ready with the connector on, so when the hot tub comes, whoever hooks it up, could be me if it's not for a few months here. It could be somebody else because I may be away. But anyway, they'll just have to plug it into the spa pack, and not plug it in, but put the connector into the spa pack and tie in 4 connections: ground, neutral, and 2 hots. So here's the other end I was pushing the wires through to. You can see I got plenty here. I'll leave this at the spa end. Now, another thing I forgot to mention when pushing wire in, to reduce friction, keep those conductors straight as possible. If you're cranking on them and bending them, every little bend you give those wires is going to add a little resistance, and boy, it adds up quick. So keep them as straight as possible. Little dish soap. There you go. So here's the connector. It's just a spin-in connector for Liquid-tite Flex 3/4. Purchased at the Home Depot, or you can get it at Lowe's or any of the good hardware stores. It twists in. Another thing I should mention too is looking back at a couple of these shots, I noticed that the camera does add 10 pounds. So add that to the 10 pounds. I'm kind of up. Got a little bit of a belly going on there. That'll be all gone when I come back from Costa Rica. You sweat it off there. Always seem to lose about 10 or 15 pounds when I go there in the winter. Gain it all back when I come back to Canada. You got to eat heartily in Canada to stay warm. Shouldn't say that, we had a really good summer here, but I like to get away for the winter. So there you go. I'm just going to grab my pump pliers and spin that in nice and tight. There's a lock ring already installed here, and an O-ring gasket to make a watertight seal. And that's done, that end. So just to finish tightening that connector in, I had to get my channel lock a little too tight to do by hand, and I don't know if you can see that. Sure you can. Right in there's another little rubber gasket that makes a seal against the Liquid-tite Flex from the connector. So you tighten that in, and I'll have to answer that telephone call till it squishes the gasket down, and you're done. Okay, so as you can see, I've got my service disconnect opened up here. Already got the conduit tied in, the feed from the panel. Now I've got to knock this out to 3/4 inch, and we'll tie in this Liquid-tite Flex. So let me pull out those knockouts, and then once it's in, I'll show you the connections we have to make here. Okay, I've got my connectors installed. Here's the Liquid-tite Flex one. Now let's tighten that lock nut just so that the O-ring seals nicely down there. Not that water's going to come from the bottom up. Now I just got to cut these cables to the appropriate length, wires, and make my connections. I'm going to need one wire nut suitable for 2 number 8s to tie the neutrals together. And just a comment on knocking out those knockouts in a box like this. They're just spot welded, so you got to pick the size you need. And you usually knock out the center one first. You can see one at the back there. Knock it out first, they come out easy. They're spot welded on one side. Then the others are spot welded 180 degrees apart from each other. So you just kind of want to bend it up on the ring you want. Bend it up on each side, opposite of the spot welds. Then just grab your plier and start wiggling it back and forth, and it'll break out nice and clean. Okay, there's my ground wires connected to the ground lug in there. Notice I left a little loop of slack on each one, and I'm going to do that with every conductor, because imagine if for a minute that what I leave at the other end is an inch or two short. Well, then this allows you to pull a little more down the flex. I've left plenty at each end, but always good practice to leave a little slack. Don't just pull that ground wire tight up to the lug there and tie them in. Then you have no room for air. All right, so here's the black and red hots from the breaker, from the panel feed to this service disconnect, and on the terminals marked line, the 2 center ones, and the outside 2 are load, so I'll tie in those next. But just while I got the camera in tight here, you can see those jaws in there, and all this pull-out disconnect does is put a piece of copper bar across those connections. So it's not meant to be pulled under load, just meant to be used as a safety disconnect while you're working on the tub. Okay, and on the outside left, black is the load terminal going to the hot tub, and on the right is the red terminal, load, going to the hot tub. And as you see, I left a little loop of slack in everything. Make it all nice and neat. And further to that, when you're tightening terminals like this, lugs, terminal lugs, on a stranded conductor like that, you want to tighten it down snugly and then wiggle the wires. Wiggle them back and forth a little bit, and you'll find you'll get an extra half turn to almost a turn on those lugs, because what happens is those strands of the conductor, the individual strands, will kind of fall over each other and flatten out, and you get a better connection. If you just snug it down once, somebody wiggles those wires and that terminal is instantly loose. So you want to gently wiggle them as you're tightening. Okay, and there you see I've connected my neutrals together. So we got grounds, check, neutrals, check, line in, check, line out, check. Ready to close this up. Okay, so I got the cover on. Now the final step is to put in, see, you got 2 copper blades, one on each side. They just stab into those jaws in there. So it's labeled, as you can see. If you got on showing up right, then that means they're connected. But we were going to flip it now, shove it in upside down, and you can see the off is right side up. So off like that. Shove it firmly into place, and you can see on is right side up, and that's plugged in. So again, we'll leave it disconnected. Okay, we'll close the box. And here's something that's a good trade practice, is because this conduit now broke the integrity of the insulation back into the behind the wall here, we're going to stuff this LB full of fiberglass insulation, and that just keeps any cool breezes from happening to be blowing into there. Not that they would be, but always good to keep the integrity of the insulation. So put that box cover back on with the insulation inside. Okay, the outside work is done now, pending waiting on the hot tub. So just strapped it down the wall there and along the bottom, and I coiled up the remainder, and whenever the tub gets here, they can just run it, maybe even bury it partly in through the grass or the flower bed there and up into the skirt of the tub, make the final connections. And I taped off each individual conductor, even though we're going to leave the breaker off and marked do not turn on. We've got the service disconnect in the off position. So there should be no safety hazard at all here for this. And as long as nobody turns everything on, and even if they did, I've got the conductors all taped off. So ready to go make the final connections in the panel. All right, so we've reached the final step, working backwards now from the hot tub, which of course isn't here yet, but working back from the final connections ready for the hot tub all the way back to the panel. Now this is a sub panel. This house has a 200 amp main, and it's got a 100 amp sub panel, sub breaker feeding this panel. So this panel also has a main breaker of 100 amps. So far in this panel, all they have is a heat pump. That's a new heat pump that they added here, the previous owners over on the west side of the house. So they must have put this panel in, I think, for two reasons. One is the panels are in the garage in these places. So that makes it awful difficult to fish into that panel because it's built flush mounted into the wall. A little difficult to get at after the fact unless you get at it from the outside and come in. So I think they put this, they may have even done this in the construction phase because it looks like a really well done installation, and it looks like it was planned and thought out, because this part of the crawl space here, this is a bit of a basement, but it's kind of a low ceiling. So it's only about a 6-foot ceiling in here. And then all the houses in these areas here on the west coast, on Vancouver Island, they all have crawl spaces. So most of them are only 3 feet, the same height as this one here. But this one, they dug it down a little deeper, and that's really nice because it made it for a shop. I'm sure the guy planned on having a shop in here because it's got beautiful lighting in here. And of course now he could put a bench along here and hook up anything he wanted electrically, lathes and welders, whatever he wanted could be done here. But so far they only added the heat pump, which is just a direct shot across through the joists over to the west side of the house. And they have the pantry. So they installed a microwave inside a pantry here. So they've fed that here. That must have been an afterthought as well. So as you see, we've got a 40 circuit panel here that pretty much empty. So that's kind of nice to work on. Also, I could shut off this main breaker, which feeds the tub here, so I can shut that off and not worry about having any live buses when I tie in this feed wire. So that's my 8.3 heading through the trusses over to the service disconnect. We've been through that. So I'm going to remove this panel cover, and I'm going to bring it in the top with the rest of the cables that have been added so far to this panel. And then I'll show you all the connections inside to that GFCI 40 amp 2-pole 240 volt breaker. All right, so I've plugged my lighting into a circuit that's fed from the main panel, so I can shut this breaker off, and I've taped it off just so it doesn't get bumped on or anything. Safety first. So now we're going to take a knockout out of the top, and it does not really matter where you do this, but it's going to make a nice bend here in the wire and drop right into the top of the panel, and I'll put my GFCI on this side. As I said, now with a nice empty panel like this, nice to work on. It's not always going to be that easy because lots of times you're going to have to fight with a full or almost full panel trying to fit that big breaker in. So this is excellent. All situations are going to be different, and this couldn't be easier really for this purposes to have the panel here, this empty sub panel. So let's tie that in. First I start with the knockout. So I'm going to take one here right on the edge, and it's a 1/2 or 3/4. So I'm just going to be getting in the way of the camera here for a minute. Might be easier to knock that 1/2 inch out from the inside. Get your screwdriver on there and give it a wrap, and there you go. Got the 1/2 inch plug broke free. I just have to bend that up. Give it a couple twists and off it comes. And now here's that second ring for 3/4 inch that I need. Again, I'm going to have to get my head in the way. I like to bend it down on both sides. Can you see that? I don't know if we can see that in there, but I bent it down on both sides, opposite of where the spot welds are. And then just a few wiggles back and forth, and that breaks free. So I should have showed you that, I guess, a 3/4 inch 2-screw cable connector. plenty big for 8.3 NMD. And your hot tub may ask for a 60 amp service or a 50 amp even with a 6.3 cable, but this one works with the specs calling for 40 amp 2-pole GFI. Just have to knock that lock ring tight using my electrician's hammer. You could use a real hammer if you wanted. Make sure your screws are facing outward towards the face of the panel so that you can tighten them down. Kind of get yourself an idea of where you want to strip that cable. Just going to mark it quick where I want to strip it while I go get my knife. Okay, double check, nothing moved. Again, I'm going to show you how I strip heavier cable like this. Keeping my fingers out of the way, notice I have them all. Do have a little nick here, but that wasn't from cutting stripping cable. So just score it. I just like to score it with a utility knife, not through by any stretch. You can kind of feel. You know you're not going all the way through. If you did poke through the outer jacket, the PVC jacket, you'd feel it. And that's what you don't want to do. You don't want to nick those conductors. So at the end you can push a little harder and you can just peel it apart. And rip it off. Up to here. Now carefully I want to just trim back the jacket, again without hitting the conductors, and cut that cable off. Cut that jacket off the cable. Okay. Connectors opened up far enough, I could feed these in. Even though this panel is turned off, just treat it like it's hot. Good practice to get into. There are times, not as a do-it-yourselfer, but there's times as electricians we have to work on something hot. It's a last resort, but if you do, always be cognizant of those bars because they're what's hot. They got 120 on each and 240 between them. Tighten those screws equally. You don't have to be too tight here. You don't want to pinch the conductors. Just snug is all you need, just so that can't be pulled out of the panel. Always make nice little bends in everything. That way when the inspector looks at it, and I'm sure you got an electrical permit for this, and when he looks at that and sees that you took pride in your workmanship and made nice bends and did everything up correctly and neatly, he's going to say, hey, you either hired a friend to do that for you or you watched one of Terry's internet electrician videos to show you how to do it right. Okay, so now we tie in our ground wire. And again, beautiful that we got lots of room to work in here. I'm going to bring that down, and again, just because I can, leave a little bit of a loop in here, just in case I want to juggle those breakers around in the future to add more circuits. Put a future shop in here. Okay, got that ground in, just bring it out 1/4 inch or so past so you know that you're through the terminal. And snug that down tightly. Hey, now's a good time to check connections on the others as well in here. Make sure they haven't backed off, and they're not. They're good and tight. Somebody who'd wired this panel knew exactly what they were doing. Okay, time for our breaker. Okay, here's our 40 amp 2-pole GFCI breaker. As you see on ground fault breakers, one of the most common mistakes a do-it-yourselfer will make is they'll hook up a GFI breaker just like you would a regular breaker. They'll put the neutral from the load, they'll put that on the neutral bar and they'll say to me, "Hey Terry, got a question for you. What's that little pigtail off of the GFI breaker for?" So what that is this has to go to the neutral bus bar, and then your neutral and your hots go to the GFI breaker. And again, I've explained it before, but I'll explain again what GFI breakers do, ground fault circuit interrupters. They monitor the current flow. So you have to have equal amounts of current on the hot, either hot, and any balanced, unbalanced load, I should say, on the neutral. If there's anything wrong, then it trips. So just as an example, if you're pulling 10 amps on the red wire and 12 amps off the black, feeding this hot tub, there should be 2 amps flowing on the neutral to the bus bar. If there's any deviation whatsoever, that breaker trips. So that would say you and your wet little body jumped out and you happened to, terminal popped out inside the spa pack and was sitting on the ground, which is highly unlikely because that would have tripped the breaker. But just some reason there's a fault in your tub, maybe in the windings of the motor, and you are in the tub and you put one foot on the nice wet ground, then there could be a little bit of current passing through you into the ground, and this thing is going to say, "That ain't right," and it's going to trip. That's why we have ground fault circuit protection on anything to do with wet conditions or swimming, etc. So I think I'll put this breaker, it does not matter where, especially in this panel, well, being it's wide open. I think I'll probably just put it 2 spaces down, maybe right here. So I'm going to tie that in, plug it on, make sure that's firmly on this bus, and now you're neutral. So again, just to leave room for that thing to be moved around if they would like to change positions of that breaker, I'm going to put it way down here where I got lots of room. Lots of length so that that breaker could be moved to another position. So strip that. This is a little lighter gauge, this neutral from the breaker, so I can use my stripper for that. It's a 10 gauge. And we'll bring it down nice and neat to the neutral bus. Right about there should work. As would any of these terminals. And again, try to make that nice and neat. 90-degree bends and everything. That looks pretty good. Okay, and now we'll start neutral. I think I'm going to leave this entire length of these conductors. Untwist them though, make them look nice. This neutral will follow that one down and then bring it up and onto the neutral lug of the breaker. These higher gauge wires, you have to be creative on how you strip them. I like to use a utility knife. Again, don't score the conductor. I just peel a strip off it, and then with my plier, I score it around the outside edge of it, and then carefully peel it off, and that way I don't nick any of the conductors, and I strip my cable. Neutral connection is marked with a little white dot in here on the back of the breaker, and it's right above the panel connection neutral. So and again, stranded conductors, watch me wiggle as I tighten, and you can see my screwdriver's turning, making that connection even tighter. If I'd have stopped where it first felt tight, the minute you wiggled those wires in here, that terminal would be loose. And you'd be wondering why your breaker keeps tripping or why you've lost connection. Again, just trying to make things nice and neat here. Okay, that looks good. And then your 2 hot wires. Matters not, red or black on which one. Some like to be consistent, I usually do. If I wired this panel myself, I would make sure that the red conductor coming in from the sub sub-feed breaker from the main panel is on one side and the black on the other, and then I'd keep that consistent all throughout the whole panel, reds and blacks on the same sides, but again, it really does not matter. And they've started with red on the bottom of the breaker, so I'm going to do the same thing. I could even check to see if that is red. So red, black, red, black, red, black, red, black, red, black, red. Yeah. Okay, now watch this again. That terminal's tight. Now if I wiggle it, I got another half, almost 3/4 of a turn on that. Funny story while you're watching me work. When I first started in the trade, I was 18 years old, and at that time, coming from just being a ice maker at a curling rink, nothing against that, brother, lol, but he hired me and I was working there. And then to go from that to an electrician, guy felt like he was pretty important at that time in my life. And so a friend of mine, I was helping out some other friends wire their home, and I was showing a buddy of mine all that I knew, and I was showing off by working on a panel like this that was hot, just to show off that I could do it, and telling him how dangerous electricity is. I had him put a belt around my waist and be behind. I said, if something goes wrong, you gotta pull me back off of there, because I could get locked into those panel buses. And it's true, in the right situation you probably could. But anyhow, so I'm doing that, thinking I'll of course not have any incidents, and I was carefully feeding a new cable in like we did here, and the ground wire got away from me, fell across the bus bars, exploded. So you got 240 volts across a dead short of a 14 gauge ground wire. Sparks and molten copper flew out, luckily hit my glasses and did not hit my eyeball. So that was a lesson learned. Anytime you can, shut the power off. Not impressing anybody by doing something stupid. Okay, last connection. Again, it's tight now, wiggle it, and there we go with another 3/4 of a turn. Give that a nice bend. You could even take some tie wraps now and tie wrap these nice and neatly and straight in here, but not necessary again with just this few wires in here. Another thing to watch for, don't have any conductor running right in behind here where the panel screws go in. Well, how do I know that? Experience again in a big full panel. Someone had wires run right down in behind here and turn in that panel screw, dug right into the conductor, and boom, breaker trips. So keep that in mind. Okay, we knock out the panel cover for that space, close this up, and we're done. All right, so there's zoomed in on a nice tight shot of that breaker. Red on the bottom terminal, white stacked on top of the panel neutral from the breaker to the panel bus, and the black on top, ready to knock out the panel cover and close things up and label the panel. Of course, we want to label it, and we're going to put some tape across that breaker and leave it in the off position. And one thing I should also say is we know we're protected in 3 ways here. We've got that service disconnect pulled out. So it's safe to turn this on just to test it, make sure it works. So it's in the on position, hit the test button, and it trips. So back to off. Okay, that's a completed job. Thanks again for watching start to finish on that best electrical hot tub connection tutorial on the internet. Terry Peterman, the Internet Electrician. Please now, if you liked it, give it a like below, and if you would, please subscribe. Subscribe to my channel, click on that notification bell, and leave a comment, because your situation may be a little different, and maybe I can give you some tips or tricks as to how to complete your project. So thanks again for watching. Terry Peterman, the Internet Electrician.